All right, welcome back, everybody. We've got 6 speakers to try to go through in a little under 2 hours, so we're going to go ahead and start. Our next speaker is Ellis Hughes from Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, where he's going to speak about our package validation framework. On deck is Bo Lang. Thanks again, Ellis.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. All right, so today I'll be discussing the R package validation framework, which is a framework that I came up with on how to approach validation for your internally generated R packages. So this isn't something that's on CRAN. This is packages that you've developed in-house and you want to validate them to prove that you trust them. So yeah, let's get started. So like you said, my name is Ellis Hughes. I'm a statistical programmer. Been programming in R for almost 6 years now. I have a history working in statistical genetics, and currently I work at Fred Hutch in the Sharp under VISC, where I work on HIV vaccine research and support a bunch of statisticians doing some pretty great work in that. I'm also pretty heavily involved in the R community. I'm one of the Seattle Use R organizers, and I also have a screencast called TidyX. So if you want to learn more about just the weird quirks about R, discuss Tidy Tuesday and that sort of stuff, definitely check us out on YouTube. All right. So before I get started, what is computer system validation? What does that like? This is really framing a lot of the discussion going forward. So it's establishing documentary evidence that your software performs some sort of procedure, process, activity, it does something in compliance with the specifications with a high degree of assurance. So that means that we trust and we're documenting that our software does a thing that we're expecting it to be doing. And the typical reason why you might be doing this is it's required for FDA submission. A lot of people will reference 21 CFR 11 or the general principles of software validation as to how to perform that or why it's important. But there's additional benefits as well to why you might be validating your software. Well, number one, it improves the quality and safety of your code because you've thoroughly gone through and vetted your code. You've gone through, you've tested it, you've been able to prove that it does exactly what you think it does, and will throw an error when it was outside of the bounds of what you expect it to. It usually will result in faster processing because you've already built your package or your software to help you perform a task. You can, rather than trying to write code from scratch, you're able to then use the code you've already written in another project, and that just improves speed. It also promotes trust because you've gone through and validated everything, because you've thoroughly vetted everything, because it'll throw errors when it's outside of your specifications. You can trust your code more to give you the correct answer or throw an error when it's not. But validation in practice can be a lot. There's a lot of documentation. There's a lot to validation. Because first, normally you have to fill out a form for your specifications, what the planned uses are for your software, what the environment that you're planning on working in. Then you actually have to write the code and record who wrote what, the functions, and record it typically in some sort of Excel or Word document outside of your scope of work. Then you have to go and fill out another form to document test cases, what testing environment you're working in, and any auxiliary information around that. Then maybe it's the last form where you fill out your testing plan to make sure it's comprehensive, that you're proving that all your specifications are being met. Finally, well, not finally, but then you have to manually evaluate your tests and get screenshots of your results. And then you have to review your documentation and compile this final report of all the documents and get sign-offs for release. And at any point, that can feel like game over because you have to go back and restart. If something changes, it causes a cascading effect across everything. But in this talk today, I'm going to tell you how validation and R can be best friends. They can work together to give us all the things we need to do for validation. Using a combination of Markdown, Test That, and Roxygen 2 with other package development tools that already exist, we're able to go through and create a document that looks like this. At the click of a button, we can record the environment that we worked in. We can create sections for people that were involved in the project to sign off, record the environment, who authored what pieces, so the specifications, your functions, your test code, record what the coverage is of your specifications to your test cases, as well as record what your specifications, test cases, and the results are all in the click of a button in a matter of minutes. So there are several different steps to the R package validation framework. So first you have to write your specs, then you write your code, record your test cases, write out the test case code, and finally generate that documentation. So it's not entirely different from what we did before, but hopefully with this framework, it's a lot more streamlined, a lot more in part of your actual development process. So the advantage of this, as I said, is it's part of your R package development process. It doesn't take you outside of it. It, in fact, will help your package development process. It's native to programmers because everything that you're going to be doing is actually part of the package itself. It doesn't feel like you're going out and filling a bunch of forms out to then finally do the programming you're wanting to be doing. It'll satisfy the requirements you're able to prove that you've satisfied the requirements. It allows for iterative development because there isn't a bunch of things built up on one another. You can go through and kind of shift pieces around and fix them as you go. And then it's also reusable. So you can take the same code or take the same specs that you write and share it across multiple projects that you're working on if that's what you so need. So first step is recording your specifications. So specifications are recording like what is the thing, what it'll be doing, what are the expected outputs, what are the expected inputs, at a high level, what is the thing supposed to be doing. And so if I were to be writing a specification for my presentation today, I'd say my presentation will cover the contents of my team's approach to validation. It'll be roughly 15 to 20 minutes long since that's the time that I'm allotted. And then hopefully it'll be entertaining so that you'll pay attention to me. The way that I suggest recording your specifications is using Markdown format, simply because it allows for a lot of nice formatting that you can read very easily just in plain text. I have seen people use a CSV to record their specifications. That's perfectly acceptable. I suggest a single file per specification so that it kind of forces you to think about what exactly you're trying to specify without having a bunch of things interrelated. You want to clearly define what your specification is inside of your file there. They're independent. And finally, and the huge benefit is they're in close proximity to the task. So you're going to be saving them actually within your R package. At the very end, I'll give you a format for where everything lives, but it's close to where you're actually going to be doing your programming. So it's very easy to go, oh, shoot, what was that specification? And then jump back over to look at that. There's some key information that we're wanting to be capturing is an auxiliary to our specifications, which is who wrote that specification and when they wrote, because that's information that we want to be capturing. And so if you were to be writing a specification in the format that I'm suggesting, it might look like this, where we have some, oh, wrong way. I gave away some stuff there. But all right, so we're going to be capturing the title of the specification. We're going to use these specially formatted comments there to capture the author and when they wrote it. And then our specifications here are formatted using Markdown, where we have our specifications. Like I said, the presentation will cover our validation procedure. It'll be 15 to 20 minutes long. It'll be entertaining and optionally fame and glamour and maybe start a branded accessories chain. Okay, so I skipped forward accidentally a little bit, but you might be thinking this right now because I'm going to be talking about code. And we all are probably relatively good R programmers. Don't worry, that's not what I'm going to be talking about right now. Actually, what I'm talking about is how to document your code for validation inside of this framework. And what we want to be capturing there is who wrote the code, when they wrote it, and then make sure that you can update that ownership right at the time that they update the code itself. And so the way we're going to be doing that is with Roxygen tags, very similarly to that prior piece there. We're going to use the specially formatted comments, the at section. We're going to have the last updated by and last updated date sections. And the value of that is it allows for you to be working in close proximity to the task because you should already be documenting your functions using hopefully Roxygen because it makes it super easy to be documenting your R functions. It's just a natural extension of that. And it adds, because we're using Roxygen documents, it'll add Roxygen tags, it'll add documentation into the actual RD files that you generate into your R package. So it kind of provides a little additional information around that. So if I were to be writing a function here, so say I wrote the function joke, it's got two arguments, setup and punchline. I've got my standard Roxygen tags up at the top here where I have the title, description, params, and examples. I'm going to add these two oxygen tags here, the at section last updated by, and I wrote this, and the at section last updated date. And this is, just a date that I put in there. But say somebody came through and they updated it. Joe King came through and updated it and said, no. So here's the thing. Your function needs to have a wait argument in there because you want to wait to serve that punchline. So Joe King went through, updated the param, so we have that there. But because Joe came through and updated the function, he now owns it. And so he has to update the last updated by and the last updated date to when it was updated, and he's the one that updated it. So now we have that exactly in the code itself, but within the documentation, we actually are able to capture the last updated date and last updated by inside of our D file. So if anybody has any questions, because it's an internal package, they know that they can email Joe and go, hey, Joe, I'm having an issue with this. Can you please explain this to me? And we can take care of that very quickly. So that's the benefit of that. But now we're going to discuss test cases. So test cases are where we're going to be drawing the connection between how our functions are meeting our specifications, because this is the whole point, right? We want to make sure that we are satisfying our specifications. Like that's why we're writing this function or this package. So a single test case can satisfy multiple specifications because it can cover a lot of ground. However, every specification must be satisfied by at least one test case. So you have to prove that every specification you have has been met. A good test case has several different components to it. It'll outline the goals of the test case. So what are you trying to achieve with this test case? Typically, that's where you'll be listing, like here I'm reading specifications 1.1 and 1.2. You're going to specify the required input data so that somebody can come in and without any external knowledge other than knowing how to program in R can read through your test case and write it all out. Write out the test code that you're supposed to be writing based on the test case. It's got to be a really good recipe to get to the output. So you have to very clearly define each piece of the test case, but you can't write it in code. You can say, hey, use this function and use these arguments, but you can't just write out code that they can copy and paste. And then having very clear expectations for what they're supposed to be testing against to prove that they've met it, so that there's no ambiguity in that. When somebody comes through and reads their code against the test cases, they understand what's going on. When you're documenting your test cases, there's two things that, as you've probably seen, that we're consistently capturing: the who wrote the test and when they wrote it. But finally, some additional information is which specifications are being satisfied by our test case. And we do these with the same sort of oxygen tags, except we have this new one, the at section specification coverage. And so this is what our specification file might look like. I suggest using Markdown again because it makes it really easy to read, just natural prose. We have our authorship, when it was last updated, the specification coverage in that format there. And then we have our information about the test case itself. So once again, the test case for this presentation, I'd be testing that I met my specs 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3 by practicing this on my coworkers or significant other. I will present to a captive audience and test that it was informative by asking my audience what they learned. I'll time my presentation to make sure it was between 15 and 20 minutes long. And I will test that I was entertaining by counting the number of chuckles from my coworkers, or if I'm presenting to my significant other, the number of eye rolls. Now for test coding. This is where you're actually implementing the test cases that we just explained here. We're going to need to record the results of those test cases, or record the results of the test code to prove that we've met our specs. And very importantly, we need to have a third party. So somebody that wasn't involved with writing of the test cases or the code itself, so that they're able to go through and check that it all works and without any external knowledge. And the benefit of that is it'll help resolve any interpretation errors. So in the documentation, in the test cases themselves, because they don't have any preconceived notion of what's supposed to be happening, they're able to ask the questions that somebody that wrote the functions might already know. And then they can also help identify improvements. So they might be, hey, this function here is taking a really long time. That might be a place where you can go through, I don't expect it to take a long time, that we can try to improve it. The way we're going to go about writing the test code is using a familiar framework, the test that, and we're also going to augment it with Roxygen to, as you've seen, that's a relative theme along the way here. So we want to be capturing who wrote that test code and when they wrote it. And we're going to use that at section last updated by and last updated date to capture that information there. So we're going to have that section there. Jess Tur came in and updated or wrote the test code and wrote the expectations there. It's all within this test that framework. So we're all relatively familiar with that. The reason we're using test that is it's familiar framework. It's used in thousands of packages on CRAN, and people know how to use it. It has the benefits of being able to be run and developed interactively, but also in batch mode. So we can, as they're building up their test cases, they can make sure that it all works. And then there's automation around that. So additionally, test that has these special objects, R6 objects called reporter objects. They're able to track and test each expectation. They'll report the success as passed, and they'll report each failure, report the failure mode. So this is probably what you're used to seeing when you're running your test cases. And it's relatively it's not very friendly to somebody that's trying to track, okay, what is the exact results? So what we did is we wrote a custom function to extract the results from our reporter objects and capture that all here. And so we have a table now of each of our tests and the expectations, whether they passed or failed. So what do we have so far? We have our specifications, we have our code, we have our test cases and our test case code. But now we need to document everything. We need to record all the results. And the way we're going to be doing that is through our markdown. So we need to have some final elements to record. So that final sign-off page and the environment information, such as the R version that we used and the package dependencies in those versions. So like I said, we're going to use R Markdown. It lives in the vignettes folder, so it can be built as soon as we build our R package or just at the click of a button. And it's super flexible to any format that we want to be using. We're using Roxygen 2 to generate the list of the ownership and generate a table of specification coverage and test that once again to record the results of test code. So with their powers combined, we can generate that PDF file that I showed you at the very beginning, where we have this the table for sign-off. We recorded the validation environment that we executed everything in, the authorship that we have for each of the different pieces, and the specification test coverage, and finally the actual specification test case and test results, all there. So everything would live inside the vignettes folder. We'd have the validation R Markdown. We have the results in the PDF, and then a validation folder that contains our specs, test cases, and test code, however you have them formatted. So validation and R can truly live together forever. Many thanks to all the people that helped me work and develop this framework and all the code that was around that. Marie, Anthony, Jimmy, Barthy, Raphael, Alicia, Shannon, Paul, Kate, and everybody that's at VISC and at Sharp that allowed me to work on this and really bounce ideas off of you. So you can find this presentation. There'll be slides shared at thebioengineer.github.io/validation_rpharma. Thank you.
That was an excellent talk, Ellis. I really appreciate that. I haven't heard clapping yet. I need to have some clapping, but excellent talk. We got a few questions. You got 2 minutes. To the next one, we've got a few questions. One, there's a little bit of conversation about a Git workflow for this in the context of using these hooks. How could we actually use it in a Git workflow? And then I think Phil's also mentioned the Ators package that actually produces the summary documentation report. Any more that you would? Could you kind of talk about your exploration of other methods? What made you sit on this particular?
Like how I came up with this framework exactly?
Yeah. It can be a side topic. You got 1 minute. So.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways you can be approaching this. I think this can be slid into like GitHub Actions or something like that, where you're continuously regenerating and revalidating. However, it's not truly validated, at least in my understanding and context, unless you have people signing off on it at the very end of the day. But what you can do is you can have, or what we're doing is we do everything, we build it, we're all testing it throughout. But then when we're actually ready to actually release our R package, we then print it off, or have an official process where we print it off, everyone signs off on it, and then we have a version of that package as is. It's available on the main branch with all the documentation all there. So that's kind of how we approached it. And we're trying to make it very smooth and easy for people to only be able to use the validated version unless they explicitly don't want to. But yeah, happy to answer any other questions people have later.
All right. I will post the questions, get them back to you on the separate channel.